I'm not pioneering things, you know. All I'm doing is I'm continuing these conversations, I'm continuing the work, I'm continuing the advocacy, I'm continuing the community engagement.
It's great, actually. It's like, you know, it's setting the pace, setting the example, the resilience of continuing to set the pace from those who've come before us.
I do think of myself as holding a space that is making space available for other people who identify with what I do.
It's the same way we look for friends, really, in Australia. It's like just looking for people who understand our experience.
A few years ago, when we rebranded as Diversity Arts Australia, one of the things that we really wanted to do was to centre culturally diverse artists in the advocacy work that we did. Centering artists as the people who would be, you know, kind of identifying key issues and creating works that were responding to those issues. The Pacesetters Project brought together 4 trailblazing artists, Aamer Rahman, Kim Busty Beatz Bowers, Rani Pramesti and Latai Taumoepeau, and Fadia Aboud also worked on the project at the beginning. So at the beginning of the project, Paschal Berry, who was the creative director, and myself, I was the creative producer, came together and had some conversations about how we wanted to structure this. And we decided we would have an intensive kind of discussion with the artists over several days, and we would present to them as part of that a series of provocations. And so we then presented those to the creatives, and we had some pretty phenomenal conversations. What all of the discussion seemed to keep coming back to was the erasure and exclusion of people of colour and First Nations people in the arts and creative sectors. That there had been these amazing pace setters, that there had been these people who had made change, who we were kind of standing on the shoulders of, and without the work that had come before us, we wouldn't be able to be where we are, but that this work had been erased and was constantly being erased. What's been really important about this project, and that's been identified by the artists themselves, is the need to develop an archives, like an actual cultural archives that we care for, we develop, and that we can have a space for these stories so that we can learn from what's happened in the past and build on that. And so it's given us a real kind of energy at Diversity Arts to really go for it and start, you know, imagining what this archive will look like, start dreaming it. So this project has been really, really significant and just kind of affirms the importance of trusting artists and creatives to lead the work of advocacy and to inform it. So this event today shares the work that we've done as part of the Pacesetters Project, and also, you know, via the conversations with the artists who worked on the project, we also get a sense of what it's led to for them in terms of their practice and their work. And through the conversations with the artists and creatives who have made work as part of the initial Pacesetters Project, we also get a sense of what impact this has had on them and what it's led to for them.
The Pacesetters Project was an initiative started by Diversity Arts Australia, enabling artists to create works responding to themes such as race, diversity and inclusion in the Australian arts sector. In partnership with Blacktown Arts, Diversity Arts Australia officially launched the project at the Leo Kelly Blacktown Arts Centre.
It was really fantastic to see all of the artists and the work that they were doing, really inspiring, and diving into those archives and seeing some of the histories that were being told.
You know, the voices stand on their own.
It created that kind of solidarity sense, that sisterhood, brotherhood kind of sense.
It creates a much more kind of exciting dialogue in terms of the possibilities of where it can go later on.
People have been fighting for change for a very long time, and it happens in fits and starts, but there are precedents for that happening in Australia.
We can't be kind of stuck in the same questions, in the same kind of problematics. Something has to move and something has to evolve into a much better conversation than either self-victimization or framing yourself as in the outer.
It's a culmination of a process, and they talked about the process as well as what's going to happen after. And so I think what's important is that the event reflects the process, and the process continues. It's about the depth and the breadth. And I'm actually really inspired by the fact that people can talk openly about this rage in this kind of setting, because in a lot of the work I do, it has to be done very covertly.
You create safety, so then you can take risks artistically and politically and culturally. So this kind of environment for the audience that you're asking me about, it creates that energy.
We have to stay true to our practices, and that comes through our own communities, building our own communities of practice. The centre is us, and that's our source of power.
A great information, especially a person of colour, just emerging towards the arts. Having this information with established artists of people of colour, it's kind of enlightening and also exciting to see what's going to happen. I have a chance!
Hi, my name is Maria Tran, and I'm a documentary filmmaker for the Pacesetters Project. I've been very lucky to have travelled the East Coast to meet up with our Pacesetters artists, get to know their practice, as well as the context in which it lives in. Now, without further ado, I'd like to present the first documentary video that I did on Melbourne-based artist Rani Pramesti. Following that, she has a conversation with Paschal Berry. Please take a look. Heading to Melbourne, I met up with Rani Pramesti, an independent performance maker, intercultural producer and an advocate for the arts. Rani has been developing creativesofcolour.com, a targeted place with curated conversations with creatives of colour.
I want to get to know how you started, like in the arts and your practice. I mean, was there a point where you felt like this is the field you want to go into? Was it like at a younger age?
I'm a storyteller, and I also work as an intercultural producer as well. I'm really into working across different cultures, because I think it's like taking care of communities. That's what producing is for me. It's taking care of different communities, diverse communities. Yes, I'm very passionate about the arts. Yes, I tried for a really long time to actually not listen to that calling to be in the arts. But at the end of the day, I just kept feeling really pulled to be in the arts. I have a vision for what I want to do, and I try and be an enabler for others as well. In my experience and the experiences of some of the people that I've interviewed for creativesofcolour.com, definitely navigating white institutions and white spaces is a recurring theme, like how that is actually a skill set, because there are certain common white practices that if you're a white person and you're in it and you haven't been taught to see the things that you take for granted or the ways that you do that you take for granted. It's so complex, you can just keep unpacking every layer. But definitely a theme that comes up a lot in terms of people of colour navigating the arts is the fact of how the arts in Australia across the board tends to be predominantly white. So for people of colour, it's a skill set and it takes experience, and there's strategies for how to navigate those spaces.
The project that you're working on, Creatives of Colour for Pacesetters, is it? Tell us, how did you come up with that?
So Lena Nahlous and Paschal Berry approached me to make something. I have very rarely experienced where I am approached with a pool of funding and trust. And it spoke volumes, because they were like, we think you're an interesting artist, can you make something?
Yeah.
And then they transferred the money to me.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted it to involve people of color somehow. At the same time, I was having conversations with Paschal and Lena, right, as my ideas were evolving. And so eventually I pitched to them, I think I want to make a survival toolkit for people of color in the arts, because I myself, I'm finding it so hard to keep going. I decided that, you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna talk to people of color who have at least 10 years of experience, and I wanna learn what are the strategies.
I feel like your work is quite groundbreaking, but what's your thoughts on where your work is placed?
Earlier you used the word pioneer, and I was just like, oh God, please don't call me that, please don't call me that.
Why though? Why?
Because there are a lot of elders, you know, who have been doing this work, who have been having these conversations, who've been doing this advocacy, who've been coming up with modules. Some of them are working with Diversity Arts Australia, right? So I just see this work that we're doing as a continuation. I'm not pioneering things, you know. All I'm doing is I'm continuing these conversations, I'm continuing the work, I'm continuing the advocacy, I'm continuing the community engagement. You know, it's continuing a legacy that we are so blessed to have.
Good evening, Rani. How are you?
Hey, I'm okay, Pascal, taking it day by day.
I guess, you know, it's been 2 years since we spoke as part of Pacesetters. So I was wondering, how has your work developed since 2019, and what has the pandemic and how has the pandemic affected you?
Yeah, when it comes to creatives of color, it's grown a lot since we last checked in. You know, at the time when we launched it at Blacktown Art Center, Creatives of Color was, you know, it was a website with 5 interviews with creative women of color. Now we're in the middle of providing like 12 months of programming in response to the research that we did also in 2019. We conducted 60 in-depth interviews with creative people of color, a mix of First Nations, Black, and people of color creatives, to identify what were some of the shared problems that creatives of color experience, you know, in navigating the predominantly white Australian arts sector. And then throughout 2020, what we did was we started trialing activities that were designed as solutions to these problems. So for example, when one of the problems was a lack of our own shared spaces, which are, you know, affordable, accessible, and safer, we then decided to trial having a studio in Collingwood Yards, which is a brand new arts precinct in Collingwood on Wurundjeri country. We were able to do one public event in our space before March 2020 and the first like shutdowns and cancellations. What we ended up doing was we moved everything online, or we created opportunities that people could do by themselves or by phone, or, you know, maybe walking one-on-one with someone within their 5K, so that we could keep offering opportunities that were, again, designed as solutions to the problems that our research identified. I'm also really aware of the digital barriers that some groups face. You know, not everyone has a device to access the internet. Not everyone has access to internet, etc. So that's why we also committed to making other opportunities that people could just do in their own space without internet or digital literacy.
Like, what were your learnings from those processes and from those projects?
I think support for mental health is really crucial. And it was crucial even before COVID, you know. This time has just kind of really underlined the importance of mental health support. That's something that I think we've been trying in the last 2 years, just keeping that up in the thread of, as a thread in our work, that community connection care has been really top of mind. It just seems really urgent. So I suppose maybe another learning is how can we be kinder on the expectations we put on ourselves and each other?
From a future thinking kind of perspective, like what's in the horizon for you that you're looking forward to?
So Creatives of Color, we were successful in securing one of Australia Council's Sector Recovery Initiatives grant. And we're in the middle of it, a project called Justice Centered Design, where we're working with Arts Access Victoria, Music Victoria, and Collingwood Yards to develop a decolonial methodology. It's been a really mind expanding, like, what kind of process? Because what I'm realizing through that is how we do change making work is just as important as what we do. We've been interviewing people, and then out of those interviews, they've been inspiring drawings and visual maps, as a decolonial method. And then Jackie Shepherd from our team is doing some somatic patterns. And we're about to go to the next phase where we're now going to bring back these patterns to the people we've interviewed. And then we're going to create, visual patterns together and somatic patterns together. Been very exciting, and I feel very blessed and privileged to be doing that work.
Rani, that was a great way to end the conversation. Fantastic. Looking forward to seeing what comes out of it, actually.
Thanks, Paschal. Me too. I have no idea. Which is part of the beauty. It's part of the beauty.
Well, thank you. And I suppose let's observe what happens to Pacesetters from here on.
Sounds good.
See you later.
Thanks Paschal and Rani on the update on the Pacesetters in conversation. Next up we have Sydney-based artist Latai Taumoepeau, who will be updating us on what she's been up to in the last 2 years, as well as a conversation with Paschal Berry. Take a look. In Cockatoo Island, Sydney, I spoke to Taya Tu Maipiel, a self-professed punaki, a body-centered performance artist. She's committed to bringing the voice of marginalised communities to the forefront. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved in Pacesetters.
Yeah, Pacesetters approached me, I think it was a year ago, and talked about making new work that was with some other artists who I thought were really great. It was a really great opportunity to look specifically at diversity in the arts. I started describing myself as a punake, which in my language is a highly revered person who works with movement, poetry, music, and is a composer and a choreographer. I was struggling with the identity of dancer, and at that time I had made a lot of work, so I couldn't call myself a choreographer yet either. But I felt that those two terms were quite narrow, so rather than trying to explain to people, what a contemporary dancer is or a choreographer is, I use the term punake, so then it keeps that word and that idea alive inside contemporary practice. And I think actually that is more of a cultural way of looking at things, like if it's a cultural dance or expression or movement. In my language there are words that don't talk about whether things are dance or music. It's performance that is about the body in the centre of it all.
Now the themes of your work. We do a lot with environment, climate change. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I, realised, like coming from my cultural background, being Tongan, that most of the works that we experience as art have very clear functions. They tell narratives of, they document time, they help us understand what our ancestors did or how to, exist inside a certain environment. So thinking about that and then starting to understand and hear about the impact of climate change, specifically in the Pacific and low-lying islands, I really felt a strong desire to start to make work and representations of what people were already experiencing. And so for me, it meant that my work could have the function of, speaking to the invisible. I made, War Dance, The Final Frontier, an animation that was presented at Pacesetters. And I started to think about how the environment fights back for itself. And then I thought of the war dances and I thought, what would that look like, you know? And War Dance became this animation that was about me performing these, the choreography that I've taken from these dances that is an ancient form of, you know, defending a place or environment.
How do you define Pacesetter and how do you explore it in your own way?
It's a strange thing to think of myself as a Pacesetter. I do think of myself as holding a space that is making space available for other people who identify with what I do, which is very important to me. So intergenerational relationships are very important to me. Hanging out with young artists who say to me, you know, like, oh, I saw your work and, you know, and I'm from the islands as well, I'm from the Pacific. I don't feel like I'm doing anything new. I'm continuing something, you know. That's really interesting to me, is to think about them as the Pacesetters, you know, and all this knowledge that I access from that is what's the pace setting. Particularly in Australia, there's been only enough space for one, and I feel like this is the problem. Like, we need to move beyond firsts. You know, once there's 2, 3, 4, then it's like the floodgates open. But I also do think that if we take risks in how we break some of those rules, like we learn things in the institutions and we can drop things as well. You know, we can make those stories, we can make those ideas that that may have already been done, but we need to explore them as well, you know. So I feel like there's lots of room for new things within contemporary making, contemporary arts, and there's many spaces that we still need to diversify ourselves in, but I think we need to just keep holding that space and creating more spaces for us, you know. And it's hard work. It's going to be hard, but like, you know, we're getting there. I think we're really getting there.
Hi there, Latai. How are you?
Hi, Pascal. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I guess it's been 2 years since we spoke. Since the Pacesetter event happened in Blacktown Arts Centre, and I guess this is an opportunity for us to have a little bit of a chat about what you've been up to over the last couple of years. We know that many things have happened, unless we've been asleep under a rock. But how has your work developed in? Since 2019, when we had that last Pacesetter conversation, and how has the pandemic affected what you do, or you're thinking about what you do?
I think the pandemic has really created a lot of space to consider some things that we don't ordinarily have enough time to really consider, and so having these big shifts into digital work and making work online. Some people are really good at doing that already, and I'm not one of those people. You know, live practice is my work and the environment is my work, so I can't kind of disconnect the problem of the pandemic from, you know, how we've contributed to that as an issue. So, you know, I spent a lot of time doing, actually accessing incredible First Nations talks online. That was like one of the most precious gifts, I think, of the pandemic, that really, you know, held my practice in a way that I, you know, was really unexpected. And of course, for myself, that was a way of generating an income for myself, was also being, you know, presenting guest lectures across our various universities and art spaces, you know. So it did impact my practice in a way where it gave me some time to think more deeply about where I'm headed, and whether I wanted to be a part of an online or create an online version of my practice? And the answer to that is simply no. It's not something I want to do.
I mean, critically, like what you touch on is this notion that there's also something to learn around your own parameters. In terms of the learning, that there are those limitations. Are there things within the digital realm that perhaps you're still fascinated by, or do you think you've done your dash?
No, I'm still fascinated by it, but I think it has to be a good match with the idea. It's not just for the sake of making work. The form of it has to match the thing that I'm trying to do. Of course, I'm still very much fascinated by it, and continue to try and collaborate with people who are doing some really wonderful things in that area. But there has to be a good reason for it.
Is there anything new on the horizon, like some compelling kind of project that you want to share with us?
Well, I mean, today was just announced that I'm the recipient of the Sydney Maya Creative Fellowship, and thank you to you for being my incredible nominator. The environmental work is part of the performance practice and what I've been really interested in is ideas of responding to systemic change that isn't necessarily in the same way that I've been working. And so some of that is also working a lot more quietly. I was supposed to start a short course in horticulture, in TAFE this year, which just hasn't happened. But, just this reinvestment in skills and following ways of becoming more dependent on oneself, I think is really important, and thinking about, the next decade.
And also, as you said in previous conversations, that it is an opportunity to replenish your reserves.
Yeah, I think there's a parallel of what we do to the planet and what we do to artists. So I think one of the biggest takeaways has been about resisting that and taking the time to recalibrate and really understand, I don't want to go back to what we've been doing. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that we can show for the time that we've spent under that rock.
Latai, thank you so much, and we'll end it there in a wonderful kind of sense of optimism about restoring ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paschal and Latai, for the dialogue and conversation. Next up, we have Gold Coast-based artist Busty Beatz' documentary, followed by a conversation with Paschal Berry.
They make one story become the only story.
In the sunny Gold Coast, I was able to chat with Kim Busty Beatz, a creative artist and performer of the international smash hit Hot Brown Honey.
So you were one of the participants for Pacesetters. What was your sort of journey and the process of you getting on board?
Pacesetters was a really interesting and fun and reflective project, I found. We started that process kind of a year before, where we got together, the artists got together and actually had quite an amazing few days at Blacktown Art Centre. There's this real need for us to reflect and archive and actually recognise that we, as the broader community, as people of colour, as like artists within the western suburbs, have actually been here the whole time.
Like, what some of the challenges have you sort of faced, especially being a woman of colour and continuing your practice?
Many times I've thought, I gotta quit. Like, there's just like, that there's a real lack of recognition, a lack of understanding and a lack of care, which is actually what we talked about in Pacesetters a lot, like the care factor for artists, especially coming from many different backgrounds. It's been hard, but there's something inside of me, and I really see it inside of the artists that I am around, is that there is such a need for us to put our stories, like whether it be on stage, on film, in written form, like we need to have our stories told, and we need to tell them ourselves. It's really been about kind of working out which fights to fight and also how to go about it. We decided with Hot Brown Honey that the battlefield was the stage and we were going to use it as such. We also love to kill people with kindness. So we've kind of come out of left field and made this kind of smash hit show.
What was the genesis of this show?
Definitely came from feeling oppressed. And like also Lisa and I going, we make such kooky, political, sometimes taboo in both our culture's work as well. So we were always on the fringes, and on those fringes, we just met so many amazing artists of colour doing all this beautiful work. And we were just like, right, so how do we strategically go about saying, we should be centre stage? Like we put it down on a plan. We actually put it down in a grant. We didn't get the grant, but we did play at the South Bank Centre.
That's amazing, because it just makes me think that it's important for us to dream big. At the same time, like that fear of like failing, like how do we get around it, you think?
It's really hard because what I feel is that like because artists have been pushed out for so long of the mainstream, we've all created our own worlds. What we're doing on the outside as outsiders, as outliers, is actually creating the goods. Yeah, so we do have the opportunity from not being so always in that mainstream space to make awesome work.
Now, the term Pacesetters, what have you arrived to understanding that term?
It's great, actually. It's like, you know, it's setting the pace, setting the example, the resilience of continuing to set the pace from those who've come before us.
And then why do you think it's so significant and important to have things like this?
We have to remember, and even for young ones coming up, I'm like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Actually, there's a whole lineage, knowledge and understanding that can be brought back into today. You're not by yourself, you know, there are amazing artists all around you and have been there the whole time.
Hey,
hello.
Yes. Look, I haven't seen you since 2019, and I guess, you know, like it would be great to sort of, you know, catch up on, you know, what you've been up to in, you know, I guess over the last couple of years since I saw you last, and importantly, you know, like how did, you know, the COVID whole kind of like the pandemic, you know, change things for you?
I mean, you know, that Pacesetters and the Pacesetters event was quite important in kind of what my own, you know, just looking at my own artistic practice and the practice of my peers and people around me as well. Yeah, and then COVID hit, and then it was sort of for me and for like my crew Hot Brown Honey, we had a whole kind of international tour that was going to go up, and we were about to kind of move into that new world of like really large scale gigs, big festivals. Yeah, kind of just went into a real time of relooking, you know, readjusting, just taking time actually. And what we found was that, I don't know when artists became the foot soldiers of capitalism, but you know, everything, it was very clear, everything in the world that was happening to artists and creatives first. And that's continued along the way. And I always say it, I'm like, arts has the capacity to transform culture. I suppose what came to the surface and what continues to come to the surface during these times is the inequity of everything really, and how structures aren't working for anyone. But because the arts and creative peoples are the tipping point, we actually have the capacity to now form a way forward, transform the world. Let's go for the absolute ultimate of what would be the best for people, for safety, inclusion, and equity. You know.
What do you think were like, I suppose, the most important kind of learning in terms of like how it's, I suppose, influenced your own like methods and processes?
It really affected me, actually. Like, I can't say it didn't. The kind of stress was massive, but it did make me really delve into my practice and delve into the way I wanted to continue to move through the world, and how that worked with a lot of, I suppose it's like collective creative power, really finding that there were a number of collectives of people across the globe who were having these really important conversations around practice, around how to make things better, about transformational understandings within arts practice. So that was quite amazing, being able to talk with so many people via Zoom, about what was going on.
And it's almost like, I guess, the online kind of world connected you to people that you may not have kind of connected with previously, right?
Yeah, definitely. We were all kind of freaking out and at the same time, but then also going, okay, this is actually a time of, absolutely being, devastated in a financial sense, and really seeing those massive inequalities in the arts where, whole institutions were just closing their doors and like cutting off contracts or cutting off like any sort of contact, where I feel like especially the independent sector, that people just continued to make excellent work that spoke to what has been going on.
What's in the horizon for you? Like, what's the next project?
I've got a couple of little projects, which is great. I just came off the demolition project with Polytoxic, and that was really just, had a great vibe. They really set up these amazing structures and held moments within the rehearsal room, and really created that safe space. And because it was like a cast that crossed sort of race, gender, and cultural identity, it just became really almost like a little microscope of like how good things can happen. I worked on a work last year called 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner by Jasmine Jones. The cast and crew were all women of colour. So great to hear it's going up, because you just don't know. It's going to do a little tour as well, so that's really exciting. I'm working on an album for an artist called Ancestress. Ancestress is an amazing Birigaba Kungaloo artist. It's Dr. Lilla Watson and Dr. Mary Graham, and they've created this work together.
Busty, thank you so much, and thanks for giving up a moment of your time.
Yeah.
And I will speak to you very soon.
Yay! Excellent.
Thank you, Paschal and Busty Beatz. Last but not least, we have our final artist, Aamer Rahman, who will be presenting to you a documentary that he made himself, interviewing a series of artists. Please have a look. Aamer Rahman is an Australian comedian and writer. His shows selling out at festivals. His work documents the experiences of several creatives as they navigate the Australian artistic space as people of colour.
As part of my work, I interviewed 3 good friends of mine, Dr. Gary Foley, Beverly Wang, and Nazim Hussain, and we talked about race, art, culture, and navigating whiteness in Australia.
And I would never see another non-white face, and if I did see another non-white face, more often than not it was another Aboriginal person, So Sydney was a very white place.
Comedy's got to be directed one way as an ethnic comedian. You're often only expect to laugh at yourself, make jokes about you and your family. So if you start to, I've done that now. This next sketch is about you. you can cop a lot of crap.
Turn on the TV in a big city in Canada or a big city in the States, and you're going to hear non-Anglo names, and you're going to see a few more non-white faces, right? But here it was just wall to wall on commercial television, especially.
You know, as someone who's not white, just making any kind of art, but then making like, you know, trying to do sort of overtly political art. It's just, Australia is just a very, very difficult space to exist in. You know, just as far as trying to make a living off your work. You know, it's such a small space anyway. Even if I look at comedy, even for a mainstream comedian, you know, there's just not much in terms of platforms or outlets or, you know, exposure that you can get in a place like Australia, in Australian media. And then on top of that, if you add like one more factor that makes you different in some way, that makes you niche or, you know, alternative in some way, it makes it that much harder. So, you know, I think as artists, we're always looking for anyone who gets what we're doing. And it doesn't have to be another artist. It can be, you know, someone who's, you know, just people in other fields or whatever. It's the same way we look for friends really in Australia. It's like just looking for people who understand our experience. So, you know, Nazim and Beverly and Gary, like they're all people that I've, you know, either that I'm very close to personally, but also have worked with politically and artistically, or who have supported me, you know, in different ways. So yeah, I just thought it would be great to have those conversations, but just kind of get them on film for other people to see. I think a lot of people just give up because it's not tenable, it's not sustainable to make your art in a vacuum, where it's not being appreciated, it's not being seen by the right people, it's not being given its due.
Hey, Aamer, how are you?
Hi, how's it going?
I'm good. Like I guess it'd be good to kind of talk about, I suppose, how the last couple of years have mapped out for you, and you know, in terms of the reality of COVID, has that, you know, affected the things that you do?
Yeah, so I had just started doing stand-up about 4 months before the pandemic, and then yeah, obviously like everyone else, just completely stuck in shock, no idea when anyone was going to be able to perform again. And yeah, I mean, I'm lucky because I do other freelance work, but for my friends who are, you know, full-time professional performers, just watching, you know, major festivals get canceled and just knowing like how much of their like annual income they were losing, that was, yeah, it's been really hard for everyone.
And has your video work continued over the last couple of years in terms of what you were doing for Pacesetters?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of work that I do anyway, sort of freelance video and media work, but I haven't, not in a creative sense. I mean, that's just kind of been what's paying the bills.
Has there been a kind of major learning about, I suppose, about aspects of your practice, I suppose, that you've kind of really sort of thought about over the last couple of years?
The thing for me is that I had been on a long break before the pandemic. So it took a lot for me to get back on stage. You know, when you lose momentum as an artist, particularly as a comedian or maybe like a writer or live performer, the more you stay out of it, just the harder it is to get back on stage. And it's not like riding a bike where you just pick up where you left off. So that is the hard part, is knowing that the longer you're not doing it, the longer it's going to take for you to get back to maybe where you were in terms of your ability and your confidence and stuff like that. But I think this time around, at least everyone was in the same boat, and also watching people adapt, you know, in ways that I was really surprised by. You know, people doing comedy over Zoom and you know, without a live audience, and which I really respect. There's no way I could do it. Like I can't.
You never try the digital output?
No, I know, and I know a lot of other comedians are like, I can't do it. But like for the ones who can, I was really impressed.
But I guess it kind of misses that kind of the agency of liveness, I suppose, isn't it? Like in terms of when you're reacting from a live audience.
There's no substitute. I've seen people do stand up on Clubhouse as well, which is like just audio. People have been forced to adapt in all kinds of ways.
I guess, the last question I have for you is, what's up next?
Hopefully a new show, if I can get it together. Everything I've experienced in the last few years has just been pointing me back at getting on stage.
In a kind of global context, are you thinking of coming back here in Australia, or what's the plan?
Honestly, I just don't see Australia as like a long-term prospect for me. Like especially with a family now, like moving back, and like I don't think there's a way for me to like particularly me to make like a sustainable kind of living in Australia. It's just too hard, at least out here, like, travel is cheaper. It's easier for me to see people. It's not as isolated, but I would still like to work in Australia. Like if I had a show, I'd like to bring it out there. Or, I'd like to write for TV or whatever, stuff like that. But I just don't see it as something I can do like long term.
In terms of reflecting back on this idea of being a pace setter, what does it mean for you to kind of, be doing this practice to a wider audience, I suppose, outside of the Australian context?
Well, the two biggest issues for me in Australia are obviously like one, the cultural one, like where like the mainstream Australian mindset is. If you want to do any art that's like vaguely not mainstream, and just the size of the audience, if you're already performing to like a smaller niche, in Australia how tiny that is. It's not that those countries are much more progressive or whatever, but they've just got bigger populations. So my niche is bigger. My niche is bigger in the US or in the UK.
Well, sounds like you have a plan. So good luck with everything, and we'll be showing your films obviously during Pacesetters. And I think one of the really interesting things about, I suppose one of the results of 2019 is the development of an archive. So it's an exciting kind of proposition that there might be an archive of really exciting kind of works that is being developed right now. So thanks for being part of it.
No, my pleasure.
That wraps it up for our online Pacesetters program. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much to our creative artists who have been involved, people behind the scenes, the coordinators, the crew, as well as the project and organizational supporters. We could not have done this without you. Once again, it is so vital that artists have moments and gaps in their trajectory to be able to reflect, archive, and recognize and have their work on the center stage. Thank you.